sometimes when you start playing guitar, it's really, really hard. I mean, harder than it should be. You're trying to press the notes and nothing sounds good. I mean, you're doing the exact same thing that the guy in the video is doing. You tune the guitar, you're doing everything right, and it still sounds bad. And I'm making this video because there's a chance that it's not you. And I don't want you to quit guitar simply because your guitar is bad. On the other hand, I don't want you to blame your guitar for any lack of practicing that might occur. But, assuming that you are taking the right steps, your guitar should sound fine and it should be fun to play guitar. And in my experience, teaching tons of students, sometimes people buy a guitar from like Walmart or Costco. I don't know if I can say the names, but because the price seems right. And more often than not, those super budget guitars aren't very fun or easy to play. They can be, but sometimes they're not. So let's take a look at all of the things that can make your guitar unplayable. The biggest potential issue has to do with the action. And that means how far the strings are from the fretboard. If the guitar has high action, it means the strings are really far from the fretboard, and that makes them really hard to press. And this is a deal breaker for pretty much anyone. Even if you're good at guitar, it's no fun having to press super hard to make your chords work. And even if you do have the technique and the strength to press the strings down in the right spots, as you press them, the string is getting stretched. You're stretching the string as you press it down. And when you stretch the string, it makes the pitch go up. So you tune the guitar and the open string is perfectly in tune. But then as you press it, it kind of tightens the string, just like how the tuning head tightens the string, making the pitch go higher and higher. And by the time the string makes contact with the fret to make the note, it's way above where it should be, and it's going to sound bad. Another issue that your guitar can have is the tuners can slip. And there's definitely some user error involved. First of all, you got to stretch your strings manually when you first put them on. And you got to stretch them a lot. You really pull on them in all the places, all the way up and down the string. And as you put on new strings, if you put too many windings around the tuning head, over time that'll stretch out and consistently detune your guitar. Conversely, if you don't wind it enough, the string can actually slip out and possibly even just fly out of the tuning head entirely. And another thing to make sure is that you always tighten the tuning head as the last motion. Just imagine that you're like screwing two boards together, like with a screw, and then you loosen the screw just a bit. The boards might still be together, but there is room for it to move out. So you always want the last motion to be a tightening motion, and that way you can be confident that the tuning head is right up in the gears and how that works, doing its job, basically. So that's the stuff that can be your fault. Now, what can be your guitar's fault? Basically, cheap tuning heads can slip. I've opened up some cheapo, like Amazon tuning heads, and they're all plastic inside, like all the gears. And, they're holding up against this crazy amount of tension. And especially as they get older, the plastic can get old and it just can't handle the tension of the string. They can chip, they can break, and they're just not very solid. So the tuning heads can literally slip. Also, the nut can be cut improperly, so the string's always getting caught in it. That'll affect your tuning too. The bridge can be misplaced or misaligned, so the actual, even if everything else is good, the higher up the fretboard you go, the more out of tune the notes are going to get. And sometimes you can get some work done that'll fix that, sometimes you can't. Now, another issue, and this is related to having high action, we still haven't discussed why our guitar would have high action. And if you look at the bridge on your guitar like this, if it's not braced correctly, the bridge kind of pulls up over time and it makes like a little hump on your guitar. This can be caused by poor construction, but it can also be caused by humidity issues. Even really nice guitars can have this happen over time, especially when they're like 40, 50 years old. Another thing is that the glue underneath can start to give and the bridge can actually lift, like you might see a little gap there. And when the bridge lifts, that makes the strings go higher and higher, even on a really nice guitar, when it's super old, just due to the fact that the bridge has been yanked on by all this tension. It's something like 200 pounds of tension. I don't know, don't quote me on that. I'll look it up and put it in the corner, but it's a ton of tension that the strings are holding and it's pulling on all this wood and glue, so to expect that to last forever, right? Sometimes it does mess with your guitar and make it harder to play. Now, I'm a huge fan of buying used guitars, and when I go to check out a used guitar, I'll take a look at it and make sure that the bridge isn't bulging, and I think that that's pretty straightforward. Another reason why your action might be really high is that the neck could be bent. Imagine like a bow and arrow. When you pull on the string of the bow, the wood part bends, and your guitar is just like that. The strings are literally like the string of the bow, and your guitar neck is like the wooden part of the bow. And you pull on the strings, they're providing all this tension, and it's making the wood bend, right? Just like a bow. And in fact, when the wood bends too much that way, it's called a bowed neck. That's literally the word for it. The strings can kind of just pull on the neck, especially say you have a classical guitar that uses nylon strings, which are lower tension, and you put steel strings on it. That's just asking for it. The neck will definitely bow unless it has a truss rod. And in steel string guitars, they always install a truss rod. And that's basically a piece of metal going down this side of the neck. So the strings are on this side of the neck, and the piece of metal is just underneath the surface on the back of the neck. Yeah, mine is adjusted through here. You can adjust it by turning it and tightening it, and it pulls the neck the other way. So the strings want to make the neck bow that way, and the truss rod, you adjust it to make the exact right tension to keep your neck straight. And you do want a slight bow, because if the neck's perfectly straight, your strings will all buzz. But, that's something that you do have to get set up. If you're not comfortable doing it yourself, and you probably shouldn't be, get a professional to set it up. And that's a really good way to make sure your guitar is in order. Now, some of the other problems that I've seen in guitars are where frets start to pull up. And I have a guitar that I really enjoy playing it, but I can't play it further up the fretboard. I'll make a clip here because some of the frets are pulled up, and when I press one of the lower notes, it doesn't matter which one I press, the string ends up making contact with the fret that's bulging out. And that might be another reason why your guitar isn't sounding good. Well, the cases that I've presented you with are somewhat extreme. The strings being way off the fretboard, or the neck being bowed, or, the neck being too far the other way. Sometimes it's just slightly off, and sometimes your guitar's still playable, but it could use a little something. And I think the easiest solution, and something that you could certainly try, is to change how thick your strings are. If your strings are a little too hard to press, try using a lighter gauge of strings. And if your strings are buzzing, I would still use a light gauge, but maybe like medium light. I would never recommend anything medium or above to a beginner. Now, my final piece of advice, if you're still not sure whether your guitar is easy to play, is to find an experienced guitarist and ask them to try playing your guitar and to give their honest opinion. You could take a lesson with somebody and just spend like the first 2 minutes of the lesson doing that. And then the rest of the lesson, you can actually learn some guitar, right? So you're really getting your money's worth. You could also take it to the shop. There's no harm in seeking a professional opinion. You don't necessarily have to pay them for the work. You can just ask somebody what they think. They're called luthier or luthier, depending on who you ask, and every major guitar shop will have one. But if you have a friend who's into guitar, it might be worth asking them who they go to, because a good luthier is hard to find. Also, if you bought your guitar from a shop and you're finding that it's not playing well, they should be setting it up for you. It's called a setup, where they make sure that everything's good. And I have a whole buying guide where we go through all these steps. I'll put a link in the corner for that, because this is a pretty deep rabbit hole. But long story short, make sure the guitar you buy feels good and doesn't have any of these problems to begin with. Don't buy a fixer-upper. If somebody, like the person at the store, says, oh yeah, we'll set this thing up for you for free and it'll sound great. Like, you don't want that. You want one that doesn't need that, and then you still get the free setup. You want to start with something really good, and you can only make it better. You don't want to start with a fixer-upper. And if you did buy a lemon, you might be tempted to go back to the place that you bought that guitar from and, just see what they have to say about it. But there's kind of a conflict of interest there, because, if they sold you a lemon knowingly, are they really going to own up and make it work? I guess it's worth trying. Ultimately, I think it is important for you to at least know the basic issues that guitars can have, because it might be a bit of a revelation. Maybe you've been struggling with your like E minor and G chord, and now all of a sudden you take a look at your strings and you realize just how far off the fretboard they are, and I don't want that to be the thing that makes you quit, when you could just easily go down to the shop and get it fixed. So that's what I'm hoping for here. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments down below, or just if you just want to say hi. Also, don't forget to check out my free crash course if you're just getting started and you want a step-by-step guide that'll get you playing your first songs and making sure that you're doing everything right. You know, tuning, holding the guitar, strumming with the beat, and so on. I'll put a link to that in the corner and down below in the description. Otherwise, have a fun time practicing, and I'll see you soon.